Welcome to another episode of the Boxing Lockdown, powered by SA Boxing Talk. Gentlemen, good evening. Hayden, Cyril, Devon, it's great to be with you guys again. COVID-19 keeping us at home and safe. And tonight we're going to be talking about fighters who are loved, fighters who are hated, fighters who never really lived up to their expectation, and the biggest surprise packages in boxing in South Africa and obviously internationally. And then we're going to talk about bizarre moments that happened in the boxing ring and in boxing. So, Hayden, let me start with you. You're drinking tea tonight. Apparently, you were telling us off camera. Cheers.
Cheers.
Teagle. You're not the Teagle, eh? Because you know his title that belongs to. Let's talk about the most loved fighters first. Let's stay in South Africa. And you got to go back and you got to think to yourself, Baby Jake Matlala, one of the most loved fighters in the history of South African boxing. Agree or disagree? And why?
Absolutely agree. And that's because he's like literally the smallest guy to ever play sports, you know? So it's really how can you not like small boxers? They like, I don't think no one can dislike a small boxer. I mean, they look harmless, but they're not harmless. I can assure you that. Baby Jake, what is he, 4'11", something crazy like that? I mean, for him to go and do what he did in his career is remarkable, and he'll always be loved. And I remember being a small boy knowing about Baby Jake. I mean, that's crazy.
Another fighter that comes to mind, Devon, it's my fighter, but I know you got a special feeling for him, is Heki Bud, also a small guy, but truly loved throughout South Africa just because of his nature and the way he looks, and boy, can he fight.
Yeah, I think it's also just like Baby Jake, it comes down to tenacity. These small guys are so ferocious, not giving a fuck, putting themselves in harm's way. And the way that they fight, they don't mind the blood, they don't mind the tears, they don't mind the losses. I mean, Baby Jake had his fair amount, so has Heki Butler on big stages, but they keep coming back, and the Michael Carvajal kind of situation reappears, and Heki Butler's situation in Japan reappears, and these guys, it's weird in this country and most of the world, you get the fixation of the big 6'4" hulking monster. Yet the smaller guys seem to garner more attention, and they're often overlooked, and I think they should be hyped a lot more.
Cyril, another fighter that comes to mind is the Rosa Soweto, Dingo Tabela. I mean, loved by all, did the impossible, winning a lightweight world championship, not once but twice, and then going up to super middleweight, winning the WBC title against Glenn Catley, but truly, truly loves in South African boxing.
Yes, I think he's also one of the most talented fighters we've ever seen. He had the power, speed, he had everything, and then as a person, his personality, he had that outgoing personality. Still got it. When you meet him, you see as a person, he's approachable to fans. So he's got that, and I suppose that's why people love him. He's got the personality and the talent to back it up.
Hayden, we're going to switch to international stuff, and obviously you can't not mention Muhammad Ali, what he did for the sports. Obviously, because of his decisions early in his career, the whole world kind of hated him and resented him to a point. And then all of a sudden they realized, well, wait a minute, what he's standing up for actually makes sense. And then all of a sudden, this villain became a fighter that everyone loved and adored globally. Muhammad Ali, your opinion on him?
Yeah, as you mentioned, he goes both ways, doesn't he? He's very controversial, and he's very witty, and particularly towards the end of his career, obviously he got to fight some of the guys as well that were also villains in their own rights, so he got to go on the other side. And then, as you said, people aren't stupid. I mean, they can see when someone is genuine and when someone's fighting for a cause. So you kind of turn people at the end. Not everyone has the ability to become a villain and go into a hero, but he most certainly did, because he's just an all-time great.
And Devon, you got to think back to the Sugar Man, Sugar Ray Leonard, when he had the smile, he had the charisma, he had the gold medal from 1976, and then he went on to become the superstar, rock star of world boxing. The smile gave it away, but man, could he fight too?
Fighting was one thing, but wasn't he also an excellent tap dancer at some stage in his career? Acting, movies, the charisma that he had. Fighting just unlocked all of those things. And a lot of the time, You know, fighters are extroverts. There's very few introverted fighters that are around. These guys all seem to have some kind of a little bit of extra in them that comes out when they've been exposed to the public at large. But I mean, how about a fighter that contains both hate and love in equal doses is still operating today, and his name is Tyson Fury, and he's the world's heavyweight champion? Because let's not forget the things that he's done in the past, the things that he said, the homophobic slurs. He said he wanted to hang his sister if she was ever promiscuous. You know, extremes like that, drugs, booze, alcohol, women on the side, wanting to kill himself to come and rise like the phoenix that he has and knock out Deontay Wilder to win the world's heavyweight championship. Is he hated and loved at the same time, or is everyone on the Tyson train now?
So, Cyril, that's a good point, because I want to ask you a question. Can fans' perspectives on a fighter change? You know, like,
I think they can.
A fighter can screw up so many times, and then, you know, Tyson Fury's, to me, I think his story is remarkable. What he's come back from depression, he's written a book, and he's been quite public about his life about that, and he's come back and he's turned his life around. You as a fan in the beginning maybe didn't like him, but after reading that, knowing what he went through, can you as a fan forgive him and accept him and love him?
I think, you know, with boxing, boxing is different to most sports in the sense that you know that a lot of the adversity that fighters face, you know, I mean, once people get to know the fighters, know what their background is, know where they've been, and you become attached to them. So yes, people can change their perspective about a fighter. I think Tyson Fury shows that, you know, people today. I think he's probably one of the most loved fighters active today. Whereas that wasn't the case 5-6 years ago. So that's definitely changed. And another Tyson that you could think about, who would be Mike Tyson, who also some people loved him, some hated him, but, you know, I mean, he also evoked some kind of emotion out of fans, which he was brilliant. You know what I mean?
So I want to talk about the most hated fighter, and my opinion is, and I don't really want to talk too much about it because the fans watching this kind of show won't really appreciate that. But in my opinion, the most hated fighter in boxing history has to be Jack Johnson, given the history behind the man and what he did, and how he basically just didn't obey the law back then. But I don't want to get into that because that's like over 100 years ago, guys. So I want to talk about the fighters that are hated today. And two names come up in my mind, and I want to talk about it. One is Adrian Broner and Gervonta Davis. And another person we've got to mention as well is Floyd Mayweather to a point. But let's talk about those two fighters. And from what you've seen recently about Gervonta Davis, guy can punch, guy can box, borderline superstar, but his behavior outside the ring has raised question marks to whether the fans will actually follow and adore him going forward. Hayden, let me start with you. Your opinion on Gervonta Davis.
Yeah, you know, the thing is, like, I'm the type of person that would hate a guy like Gervonta Davis. You know, he's living his best life at the moment, so to speak. He has got a bit of the Adrian Broner.
But hold on. Sorry, I want to interrupt. You saw the footage of him throttling a woman. I mean, you can't say that you approve of that kind of behavior because none of us can approve of that kind of behavior. I'm saying for me, that turns me off as a fan. I'm like, yeah, I love boxing, and you try and look at the sport. You look at the fighters in the ring. But again, you know, if he's fighting, I honestly, I don't think I'm going to watch him because of his behavior outside the ring, because it kind of coincides with his personality. And I don't want to associate myself with a sport that I love with all my heart, seeing a guy do that who's in the public eye and just thinks it's okay, because it's not okay.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of things that boxers do controversially outside the ring. And, you know, Gervonta is also no stranger to that, as you just mentioned, the throttling and everything like that. And most recently, Devin Haney with his comments, with what he said, a bit of Bernard Hopkins-esque in his tone. So between Devin Haney and Gervonta Davis right now, I mean, both a little bit in hot water, but more recently Devin Haney, isn't it?
Yeah, but hold on, Devin. Let me ask you, because I know you're the outspoken one. I mean, you can't be a fan of someone like that who behaves like that, because I can't.
Okay, well, let's consider Adrian Broner's disposition. We spoke about him a couple of episodes ago. So Adrian Broner, in and out of jail, wiping his ass with $20 bills. And was he a strong enough boxer to command the fights that he's landed in his career? He was a divisional champion in the lower weight classes, went up to 140, but never really achieved much there, but had a notoriety behind him. How did he have the notoriety? Because whether they pay to see you win or they pay to see you lose, it doesn't matter just as long as they're paying to see you. And I think promoters jump on that. So there's also that fine line of whether a fighter deserves to be on the stage and whether he's just there because promoters know there's a lot of people who are going to want to pay to see this guy get knocked out.
So your opinion on those two clowns?
I think, going back to what Devin said, it doesn't matter whether people are paid to watch you lose or paid to watch you win, as long as they're paying. And it's something that I think I've heard Floyd Mayweather say. So, and you look at both Adrian Broner and Gervonta Davis, both basically tried to copy Floyd Mayweather, but try to play the bad guy. I mean, you think about it. Last year when Broner had a fight with Manny Pacquiao. In no world did Broner deserve that fight, but he got it because of the notoriety that he had. So, and sometimes it works for them. It's not fair to guys who are actually being good role models and doing the right things. But it sometimes does work for these guys, which is wrong. It's wrong, but it happens, unfortunately.
Let me ask you this, Hayden. If Broner was serious about his career, because bearing in mind he is a 3-weight world champion, how good do you think he could have been? Because you can't win 3 world titles in 3 different divisions if you're not good.
Yeah, he could have been a little bit better, obviously. I don't know if he would have been like a Mayweather, for example, like he was prescribing to be. I don't think he would have ever been that good, but he would have certainly had a decent career. I mean, and he wouldn't have fluctuated through weight divisions so quickly like he did, which I also think knocked him and gave him losses. I think if he had naturally grown into those divisions, sort of the way that your body is supposed to do it, I think he could have definitely got a lot more wins.
Dave, let me ask you, do you think his behavior outside the ring has caused him to self-destruct in the ring? Adrian Broner.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can't have your eye over your shoulder worrying about the law knocking your door down and still be expected to concentrate enough to be able to follow a diet, follow a plan, go to gym every day, do the road work every morning, but then you're going out at night and you're doing stupid things that get you negative attention from the police. So, I mean, there's examples of that all over boxing, but just like I said initially, a lot of it comes from where these guys come from. I mean, Gervonta Davis comes from one of the most toughest places in America. It's called Baltimore. And Baltimore, there are stories that there are hundreds of Gervonta Davises running around. Guys who are super talented, but the streets just got them and kept their grip on them, and they'll never get out of it. So I fear for these guys. I fear for their careers, and I fear for the people around them.
So would you be shocked to see Gervonta getting into the ring in his next couple of fights and getting absolutely sparked, and all of a sudden, well, he was never that good anyway? Would that what people be saying? Would you be surprised if that happens?
No, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you just see how, for example, he's had weight issues in the past, and that's because he balloons between fights. That's just because of the lack of discipline and all the things he gets up to, the partying, you know what I mean? Boxing is a difficult sport. It's a tough sport, and looking after your body is really one of the most important things that fighters have to do. And Gervonta Davis, as talented as he is, I can see him fading out earlier than he's supposed to, simply because of what he does outside of the ring.
Guys, we're gonna move our attention to the biggest flops, and obviously Broner's name's got to be mentioned there. But let's talk about going back to the 90s, and there was a fighter who won a silver medal in the 88 games against Lennox Lewis, who lost against Lennox Lewis, is Riddick Bowe. For me, the biggest flop in heavyweight boxing. I thought he could have been one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, but just simply ate himself out of contention and never took the sport seriously. Hayden, let me start with you. Your biggest flop, in your opinion, of recent time?
Recent times, I'm thinking about Yuriorkis Gamboa. He was a lot of hype coming out of the Olympics for him, and obviously his defining fights was against Terence Crawford. Then he lost to Castellanes, and then most recently against actually what we've just been talking about, Gervonta Davis. So 3 losses in quick succession. Again, and they're not bad fights, except for the Crawford fights. I think Crawford gave him a lesson, but the other fights not too bad. I think he gave himself a good performance against Gervonta Davis. With all the hype that's surrounding Davis. But yeah, for me, failed talents, big time.
Devin, your failed talent.
Well, if I'm going to go failed talent, I'm going to bring it local because it's one that most people should be able to understand. And that's Tommy Oosthuizen. The guy had everything. Tall, left-handed, combination thrower at super middleweight, and an iron chin. The guy had skills. He was probably supposed to be one of the best fighters we've ever produced. And it just got given away. He had every opportunity. He was earning great purses, and the lifestyle caught up with him. They started to be able to go up in weight class. I think the people around him were allowing him to carry on that lifestyle that he was living, which wasn't the most honest one at the best of times, because look where he is now. He's in prison. I think the last time I heard he was still in prison, and that was as of about the 25th of February. But he was 27-0 before he got his first loss. And that was in Germany to Igor Mikhalkin, who I think later won that IBO World Championship, either at super middle or light heavy. And he lost his second fight to Biso Mkuno on a very lackluster performance where people thought to ourselves, like, was he really training for this fight? It certainly looked like he wasn't. And I get given stick a lot of the time for saying Tommy Oosthuizen and bringing this up, but he's the one guy I really think got away, and I wish that he could sort himself out so we could see something from him before his career is done.
So your pick for the fighter that just flopped, in your opinion?
I'm going to mention a guy who's got a losing record, and that was Darnell Boone. Darnell Boone, I mean, there's a guy who he knocked down Andre Ward. He beat Adonis Stevenson, came close against Sergey Kovalev. But I don't know, maybe it was promoters who didn't match him well enough. I think he faced like more than 20 opponents who were unbeaten in his career. And he just never made it to that level which he should have been. And he was a brilliant fighter. He had so much talent. I think if he had just been looked after a little bit better, he might have become an international superstar. Which it's sad because think about it, the guy now's got a losing record, but that record doesn't tell the story, does it?
Guys, I'm going to talk and ask you about your biggest surprise packages, and I have 2 and they're from South Africa. One is Vianney Bungu. In 94, he won the upset of the year by beating Kennedy McKinney. Was in South Africa, but a massive upset. McKinney was the 88 gold medalist who beat our very own Welcome Lita for the IBF Junior Featherweight Championship. Bungu wasn't supposed to win the fight, but he did. And the other surprise package was Zolani Patelo beating Veropan for the IBF Mini Flyweight Championship in Thailand. Also a result that wasn't supposed to happen, and he pulled it off. Hayden, let me start with you. Your surprise package for boxing.
Okay, I'll do one local and one international. Let's put it that way. My local one, more recent times, is actually DJ Creel. I mean, if you think about it, 3 amateur fights, 3 amateur losses. To become an IBF world champion in, like, I think your 14th or 15th fight, I think it's absolutely incredible to consider. I mean, and this is a legitimate world title in 15 fights for a guy with an amateur pedigree like that is absolutely insane. So that's my biggest surprise package. Locally and internationally, I'd say Sonny Liston, considering his lifestyle, considering where he came from, the mob took him out of prison. He went on to, become the heavyweight champion of the world at one stage and be the lineal heavyweight champion of the world at that. And then obviously succumbing to Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, unfortunately. But yeah, surprise package. There you go.
Devin, yours.
I'm also going to keep it local, but a guy who's currently operating, Siakolwa Kuse. So Happy Boy only began his career in about the middle of 2018. He ended up having my first introduction to him. I announced one of his fights. It was off TV. against Pumlani Maloney, where they went absolutely batshit against each other. They walked life and death. And all the Rumble Africa boys who were supporting him a lot, they were big and they were high on him. And I was like, what do you guys see? I don't understand. He just went life and death with this guy. I don't understand how he's going to have much of a career because he's too open and too susceptible. But then he got a SA title shot against Gusheshe Magusha, where he, in my opinion, did enough to win that fight. BSA eventually thought so too. They got the results of that fight overturned from the points win for Gusheshe to giving it to Kuse. But then, unfortunately, at the same time, Siwasiso Bandla welcomed Gusheshe to the ICC and took the title from him. And then before the year of 2019 was even out, Bandla fought against Kuse, and Kuse knocked him out and took the SA title. I don't even think the guys had 5 fights.
Cyril, your surprise package.
Well, I suppose you can't talk about surprises without talking about Buster Douglas beating Mike Tyson. Obviously, that's the biggest one. Speaking of local fighters, I think we also have to go back to our very own Sugar Boy Malinga beating Nigel Benn. That was, nobody gave him a chance in that fight. But he went in there and he proved everyone wrong and dominated against the guy who the British would consider one of the great fighters, one of the greatest fighters. So that was a big one. And obviously last year Andy Ruiz beating Anthony Joshua, that's also quite a surprise. So, yeah.
My surprise internationally, and I want you guys to do some homework to all the guys that are watching this show, is a guy called Freddy Pendleton. Take a look at his record. He won the title by beating Tracy Spann in a big fight in the early 90s. Take a look at his record. You'll be surprised, and that's why you'll understand why he is my surprise package for winning a world championship. Guys, let's talk about bizarre incidents in boxing. And I want to start it off by talking about a bizarre year for heavyweight boxing in 96 and 97. There were 4 incidents of that year that were just astounding. So here it goes. You had Evander Holyfield getting his ear bitten. You had Oliver McCall crying in the ring. You had You had Henry Akinwande basically hugging Lennox Lewis until there was like the point where Mills Lane had to DQ him and stop the fight. And there was a 4th thing. What was the 4th thing? I'm just trying to think. So, I'll get back to the 4th thing now. Devin, let me start with you. Your bizarre moments in boxing.
Oh, Andrew Gallotta, remember that guy?
Oh, excuse me, hold on. Andrew Gallotta and Riddick Bowe, 96. Yeah, so those are 4 things. So it was Riddick Bowe, Andrew Gallotta, the rematch, when he just hit him low continuously. That was the one thing. So it was that thing. It was the McCall thing where McCall started crying for his vacant championship against Lennox Lewis. Then you had the ear-biting incident. It was just a crazy time. It was before that, actually, before the vacant WBC title. No, it was because Holyfield and Tyson in the rematch fought for only the WBA title. That's what splintered the WBC title, which led to Oliver McCall, which the rumor is that he was out of rehab fighting Lennox Lewis for the vacant title. And then all of a sudden you saw him bizarrely dropping his hands, walking around and crying. And in between rounds, he refused to go back to Georgie Benton's corner with Greg Page there. And it was just bizarre. And then afterwards, obviously, you had Lennox Lewis in his defense against Henry Akinwande, who gave up the WBO version of the title to get the shot against Lewis, inexplicably dropping Lewis with a right hand, which wasn't counted in the 3rd round, but refused to fight and just held until Mills Lane threw him off. So it's just bizarre time for heavyweight boxing in that year. So, so Devin, let me go back to you. Besides that, Gallotta, and that was just bizarre. I mean, Gallotta got DQ twice after leading against Riddick Bowe. And I mean, he quit against Tyson as well and against Michael Grant.
Yeah, I mean, that Gallotta-Riddick Bowe fight, I'll just never forget, as a younger version of myself, the fights that broke out in the crowd. where warring factions of Galata fans and Bo fans would start rolling each other in the crowd. Apparently, it spilled out into the streets of New York City, and it was an absolute war zone until 6 o'clock the next morning because everybody was drunk out of their mind. But, Mills Lane, how many of those fights was he in the middle of?
Yeah. Well, he did the ear-biting Tyson story. He did the McCall fight with Lennox Lewis, and then he did the Henry Akinwande fight.
So maybe the real reason these things happened was
what's interesting, and he passed away unfortunately this week, was Ed Cotton was the guy for Riddick and Galata. So he's also he's part of that history, as well, with that bizarre year in heavyweight boxing. But just bizarre stuff. And what about Cyril, let me ask you, in 93 when Holyfield reclaimed his title against Bo, what about the fan, man, flying in all of a sudden, and there he was in the ring? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I remember I was still very young at the time, but I remember watching the fight and thinking, what is going on? And I couldn't understand. I was asking my cousin, who's much older than me, like, what is going on? What is happening here? And he couldn't explain it. So yeah, that was weird. There was just a parachute going, landing in the arena. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen in a fight.
Hey, we're going to talk about it because it's all over social media. Not over social media, it's all over YouTube and so forth. Is Butler, which is James Butler, after the result was announced with him and Richard Grant, pot-shotting with his hand wrap on, pot-shotting Richard Grant, breaking his jaw, sending him to hospital, and he, in the ring, pretty much gets handcuffed and gets sent away, gets released, and then the story goes is that he was staying in California somewhere, and he ended up killing Max Kellerman's brother after rooming with him. I mean, just bizarre stories. I mean, crazy.
Yeah, I never watched that obviously live, but I mean, like, I was watching a clip on YouTube about the most bizarre incidents in boxing. Obviously, that came up as one of the top ones, and obviously Max's story as well. I mean, like, just crazy. I feel for him. Obviously, he's one of my favorite analysts of all time. I mean, he's cream of the crop, and just for his brother to be involved in such a story like that was also like, it just bears more relevance to that guy's story. I mean, yeah, it's an ugly story. But Colin, before you move on to another segment, can we talk about some more inconspicuous moments in boxing?
No, well, that's actually our last topic. So go ahead, bro.
All right. So what about that fight with Effie Jugba when Curtis Harper hopped out the ring over Wade? That was insane. Like, I mean, Jugba is a scary man. Like, let's be honest. And I think a lot of people thought that guy was getting out the ring for those reasons at first. But like afterwards, like imagine that's just bizarre. That is just. So
the story that's going around was there was a discrepancy of a pay. He wanted more money, and he thought, you know what? Well, I'm not gonna. Whatever, I'm just going to, but it was just, that was probably the most recent bizarre thing that I can think of in boxing that's happened.
What about Jesse Vargas, Timothy Bradley? 10 seconds to go on the clock. The referee calls it.
Well, it was bizarre, but I think there was an error on the referee's part where the heavyweights actually took a choice and thought, to hell with this, I'm getting out the ring, which was, I mean, it was like live on national television, and obviously just hit all the social media posts as well, everywhere. In fact, it's still doing its rounds. I actually saw it last week somewhere where a guy says, no balls or balls, so just bizarre. Cyril, your bizarre moments in boxing that you can think of that you've seen.
I'm going to mention something recent. Well, not too recent. Remember Floyd Mayweather against Victor Ortiz? That was that Victor Ortiz headbutting Floyd, and then he just kept apologizing until he got knocked out. So that was bizarre.
That was bizarre. I mean, you shake hands and you're still apologizing, and I think he even kissed Mayweather on the side of his cheek or something, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he did. And then, like, how many times can you apologize?
So, good. Guys, I just want to go back before we close off on the show. We were talking about the fighter off camera, Edwin Valeri. I know, Devin, he was close to your heart. The guy was a wrecking machine. but major psychological and addiction problems outside the ring. Your take on him? And let me ask you this, because there was talk about him fighting Pacquiao. I don't think he would have beaten Pacquiao specifically then. I think Pacquiao would have been way too much for him, but I think it would have been a very exciting fight. Where do you think you would have seen his career end or taper off had he not been a crazy guy outside the ring?
Well, he was 27-0 with 27 knockouts at one stage of his career, and I think that's when he held the WBC lightweight. Yeah, it was a WBC lightweight championship. The way that he came back from adversity and beating Antonio DeMarco was my first entrance into ever watching him as a fighter. He was a guy that I'd always read about. But, he carried a lot of problems from a severe brain injury because he was riding a motorcycle, had an accident without a helmet on. It affected his ability to get licensed in the United States of America, which affected the venues that he was able to fight in. He fought a lot in Japan, Venezuela, where he came from. He was a full-blown cocaine addict, and this is according to a lot of sources out there that wrote about his extensive death. He was being loaded by Top Rank as an opponent for Pacquiao at a time when Pacquiao was close to the peak of his powers. I don't know as well. I don't think he would have been able to have beaten Pacquiao. I think Pacquiao would have had just a little bit too much variety.
I agree. That's what I think.
But anybody outside of Pacquiao was open hunting grounds for Valeri because the guy had murder in both his hands. And that kind of blinding power, he was also quite a smart guy. He was fast. He was an in and out busy fighter, threw lots of combinations and seemingly tough. So the sky was the limit. But then he decided to go on a rampage. He murdered his wife and hung himself in prison by his shorts not too much longer later. Sad, because the world is left wondering, what would a fight between him and Matisse at 140 have looked like? What would a fight between him and Maidana at 140 have looked like? Because he could have been at 140 by the time Maidana and Matisse were at the peak of their powers too.
Hayden, how do you think that fight with him and Pacquiao would have gone?
Yep. Pacquiao angles, work rate like hell. But Valero, knockout power. Pacquiao, around that time, I agree with you. Not that Pacquiao. Today's Pacquiao, yes. Not that Pacquiao. I think angles, work rate, speed. Manny Pacquiao under Freddie Roach, particularly at that point, untouchable for me.
Cyril, your last word on Valera. I mean, I thought he was a remarkable fighter and certainly could have been an all-time great, but just his lifestyle caught up with him, unfortunately. And I have to agree with Devin with regards to the accidents on the motorbike and stuff. It must have affected his brainwaves to some degree.
Yeah, it's sad. It goes back to the whole something outside of the ring affecting an incredibly talented fighter who had it all. He had the heart, he had this talent, he had the skill, he had it all, and he just obviously it's one of those things. I suppose the motorbike accident, it's not something that you can really control. You could have stopped himself from getting. It's sad. It's sad what happened to him, and because he was really an incredible talent. One of the big. In fact, I think I was watching one of his fights a couple of weeks ago on YouTube, and it's actually quite awesome to watch.
Gentlemen, I think I've really had a lot of fun on this episode. Devin, let me start with your last parting shot for the show.
Never forget who Andrew Gallardo was.
Cyril, your last parting shot for the show.
I think they should make a special Hall of Fame for Darnell Boone.
Hayden, your last parting shot.
Never forget being live at Sian Fick versus Ron Visser.
Oh, for some moments, Hayden, how could we leave that one out for South African boxing? Yeah, I mean, that has to be. I mean, we were in Japan at the time, and they made TMZ, but I mean, it made TMZ for all the wrong reasons. Yeah, the most bizarre moments in South African boxing, I would think, in the last 10 years, guys. Yeah.
Last one, Hayden, on the mic drop, son.
Yeah, drop the mic. I think we shouldn't be saying anything else. To all the boxing fans tuning into the Boxing Lockdown, thanks for tuning in and watching, and we will catch you soon. From Devin, Cyril, Hayden, and myself, this is the Boxing Lockdown, powered by SA Boxing Talk.